my sister sneered. "Can you even afford this place?" Then the waiter walked over and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Dara. Your usual table." My dad almost choked on his wine. My sister's sneer cut deep, a poisoned arrow straight to my gut. "Can you even afford this place, Dara?" Oh, she had no idea. Because the very next words from the waiter. "Welcome back, Miss Dara, your usual table," were about to make my father choke on his $800 wine and shatter my family's entire carefully constructed perception of me. This wasn't just any dinner. This was my family's grand reunion after 5 long, agonizing years of silence and unspoken judgment. Tonight, they were celebrating my sister Heather's engagement at Maison, one of the most exclusive, coveted restaurants in the entire city. And they had no clue who actually owned it. They'd always dismissed my culinary dreams, looked down on my passion as beneath our family name. Little did they know, everything had changed since I walked away. My stomach knotted, a familiar anxiety tightening around my ribs as I straightened my simple black dress. Sometimes, the hardest reservations to make aren't at a fancy restaurant. They're with your own past. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, Mitchell wasn't just a name. It was a legacy. My parents, Margaret and Richard, built their entire identities around status. The perfect address, the most prestigious schools, the right professions. Our sprawling colonial home often played host to lavish fundraisers where my mother would parade us, her children, around like accessories. Her pride swelling in direct proportion to how well we fit her vision of success. "The Mitchell children are destined for greatness," she'd announced to her friends at garden parties, my father nodding approvingly from behind his whiskey tumbler. "Heather's already set on Yale Law, and Ethan shows such promise in mathematics. He'll make an excellent investment banker." But when guests inevitably turned to me, the middle child, my mother's smile would tighten, just almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression I knew all too well. "Dara has creative inclinations," she'd say. "She'll find her way." What she really meant, what I always heard, was, "Dara is the family disappointment." While Heather excelled in debate club and Ethan collected trophies from math competitions, I was hidden away, spending countless hours in our housekeeper Elena's domain, the kitchen. Elena, a warm, wonderful woman from Greece, saw something in me that my parents simply couldn't. Genuine, fiery passion. "You have the hands for this work," she'd say, as I helped her knead bread dough or meticulously dice vegetables. "The way you taste, the way you smell. You understand food in your soul." By 13, I was already creating my own recipes. By 16, I was hosting secret underground dinner parties for my friends whenever my parents traveled. The kitchen became my sanctuary, my refuge, the only place where I felt truly, authentically myself. But that sanctuary was shattered during my junior year of high school. Cooking. A servant's work. My father thundered when I dared mention culinary school. Mitchell's hire chefs, Dara. They don't become them. To appease them, to keep the peace, I applied to business schools, eventually ending up at Dartmouth, just like my father and grandfather. But even there, I found ways to nourish my true passion, secretly taking food science electives and nutrition courses, justifying them as complementary to business administration. I started an underground supper club in my apartment, charging students for innovative 5-course meals to fund secret weekend workshops with local chefs. My double life, this constant juggling act, continued right through until graduate school. I was 6 months deep into an MBA program that made me profoundly, soul-crushingly unhappy, when a miracle happened. Chef Laurent Peace, a French culinary master with 3 Michelin stars, visited campus for a lecture. After tasting my food at a university reception I'd helped cater, he pulled me aside. "Who taught you to make a reduction like this?" he asked, his accent thick, his eyes incredibly serious. "I taught myself," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "From books, videos, experimenting." He didn't hesitate. He handed me his card. "You are wasting your talent here," he declared. "Come to my kitchen in New York. I will make you great." That night, that single moment changed everything. 2 weeks later, I stood in my parents' immaculate living room, trying to explain why I was dropping out of my MBA program to attend culinary school. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening, suffocating. "This is absolutely unacceptable," my father finally said. His voice dangerously quiet, radiating fury. "We've invested everything in your education." "Everything," I countered, my own voice trembling but firm, "except respect for what I actually want." My mother's face hardened, turning to stone. "If you pursue this hobby," she spat, "you do it without our support, financial or otherwise." Heather, home from her first year of law school, laughed, a cold, cutting sound. "Always the rebel. Let's see how long you last cooking for minimum wage." Ethan, already working at a prestigious financial firm, just looked embarrassed for me, ashamed. I left that night with nothing but my meager personal savings and a small suitcase. The next 5 years were harder than anything I'd ever known. 18-hour days that blurred into weeks, living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, taking out loans for culinary school. Every muscle ached, my hands were perpetually scarred from burns and cuts. Exhaustion was my constant companion. But under Chef Lauren's relentless, brilliant mentorship, I didn't just survive. I thrived. The kitchen's intense energy, the demanding discipline, the endless creativity. It fed something in me that business school never could, filling a void I hadn't even realized was there. And then, the opportunity that would change everything, the chance to truly rise. An investor who'd tasted my food at one of Lauren's private events approached me with a business proposal. 2 years ago, Maison opened its doors, with me as executive chef and a partial owner. Just 6 months after that, I bought out my partners to become the sole proprietor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd ended up using my business education after all, just not in the way my parents had ever intended. Maison quickly became the hardest reservation to get in the city. Last month, Food and Wine magazine featured us in their Future of American Cuisine issue, and the New York Times gave us a coveted 4-star review last year. Through all of this, I maintained a careful distance from my family. Occasional stilted phone calls with my mother, obligatory holiday cards, but nothing substantial. They knew I was doing something with food, but nothing about my actual success. I kept it that way intentionally. I wanted recognition for my accomplishments on my own terms, not as a desperate plea for their approval. So, when the embossed invitation to Heather's engagement dinner arrived at my apartment, I was genuinely surprised. Even more shocking was the location, my own restaurant. Of course, they couldn't know it was mine. They probably chose it because it was exclusive, impressive, and perfect for showcasing their status. After days of deliberation, wrestling with my emotions, I decided to accept, not to seek validation, but perhaps to finally close a painful chapter. 5 years of distance had given me perspective. I was secure enough in my success now to face them without crumbling under their judgment. What I hadn't anticipated, though, was how utterly surreal it would feel to watch them dine in my establishment, criticizing the very dishes I had poured my heart and soul into creating. But that was exactly what awaited me as I pushed open the heavy glass doors of Maison that evening, ready to play the role of the struggling black sheep one last time. The familiar, intoxicating scent of Maison enveloped me as I stepped through the doors. Saffron, reduced wine, the subtle perfume of fresh herbs that I insisted on having delivered twice daily. Usually, this aroma centered me, reminded me of everything I'd built. Tonight, it only intensified my anxiety. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that was actually Diane von Furstenberg, accessorized with a single strand of pearls that had belonged to my grandmother. Understated elegance that my status-conscious family would likely misread as me trying too hard with limited means. My hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, another detail they would probably interpret as me not being able to afford a proper styling. Marcus, my most senior server, spotted me immediately. His eyes widened slightly in question. I rarely came in through the front entrance as a guest. I gave him a subtle shake of my head and mouthed, "Not yet." He nodded discreetly and continued with his duties. From the entryway I could already see them. They'd requested the center table, naturally. My mother, perfectly coiffed in Chanel. My father examining the wine list with exaggerated concentration. Heather, draped in what looked like new season Gucci, next to a man I didn't recognize. Bradley, presumably, with slicked back hair and a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. Ethan and his wife Allison completed the picture, both in business attire as though they'd come straight from incredibly important meetings. Celeste, my hostess, approached with a warm smile. "Good evening, miss." She caught herself just in time. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to their table?" "Thank you, Celeste," I murmured, appreciating her impeccable discretion. As we approached, my mother noticed me. Her eyes performed that quick, calculating assessment I remembered from childhood. A head-to-toe scan that instantly calculated the approximate value of my appearance and, inevitably, found it wanting. "Dara," she said, rising to air-kiss my cheeks. "You finally arrived. We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied, checking my watch. 7 on the dot. My father stood, giving me a stiff hug that ended with an awkward pat on the back. "You look healthy," he offered, which, in Mitchell speak, meant I hadn't maintained the borderline unhealthy slenderness so prized in our social circle. Heather barely bothered to stand, offering her cheek for me to kiss. "This is Bradley," she announced as her fiancé rose and extended his hand. His grip was too firm, a deliberate power move I recognized from countless business meetings. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA," he introduced himself, "just made junior partner at Goldman. No nice to meet you or, I've heard about you. Just credentials and status, the Mitchell family love language." Ethan gave me a more genuine greeting, though his wife Allison's smile seemed strained. I later learned she'd been the one tasked with finding this impressively exclusive restaurant for tonight's dinner, and she was nervous about whether it would meet everyone's impossibly high standards. "Well," my mother said as I took the last empty seat, "we've already ordered champagne. I hope that's acceptable." I noticed they'd chosen the most expensive option on our list. Showy, but not recklessly extravagant. Typical. Around us, the restaurant hummed with a sophisticated energy I'd worked so hard to cultivate. The lighting was dim enough for intimacy, yet bright enough to appreciate the artful plating of each dish. The sound level perfectly balanced vibrant conversation and precious privacy. The tables were spaced just so, close enough to create a lively atmosphere, far enough apart for discretion. Every single detail had been my decision, from the linen weight to the custom-designed chairs that encouraged diners to linger without ever becoming uncomfortable. I watched my staff's subtle reactions as they realized I was sitting with guests. José, my sommelier, caught my eye as he approached with the champagne. The slightest raise of his eyebrow asked if I wanted him to acknowledge me. I gave an imperceptible shake of my head. "Excellent choice," he said to my father instead, presenting the bottle with practiced elegance before beginning to pour. "We're celebrating an engagement," my father announced unnecessarily, clearly hoping for special treatment. "Congratulations," José replied smoothly. "Maison is honored to host such a special occasion." "I'm surprised you managed a reservation," I said innocently, a tiny smirk playing on my lips. "I've heard it's quite difficult." Bradley leaned forward, that smug wink on his face making me suppress an eye roll. "I know people," he boasted. "Called in a favor with a client who's friendly with the management." I bit my tongue. The client was likely Craig Winters, one of our regular investors who occasionally requested tables for his business associates. I made a mental note to speak with him about Bradley. "Well, aren't you resourceful?" I murmured, raising my champagne flute. "A perfect match and a brilliant future," my father declared, raising his own. We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip, noting that the champagne was served at the precise temperature I had trained my staff to maintain. "So," my mother began, setting down her glass and fixing me with her full attention, "tell us what you've been up to these past few years. You've been so mysterious." The table's focus shifted to me. 5 pairs of eyes evaluating, ready to judge. "I've been working in food," I said simply. "Learning, growing." Still with that cooking phase. Heather sighed, as though I'd admitted to a regrettable addiction. I thought surely by now you'd have moved on to something more substantial. Not everyone can handle the corporate path, Ethan added, managing to make his defense sound almost like a criticism. Bradley looked confused. What exactly do you do? Line cook. Catering. Various roles, I answered vaguely. I've worn many hats. Well, we're just glad you're managing to support yourself, my mother said with a fake graciousness I knew so well. Though we've always said our door is open if things get too challenging. Just then Jessica, one of our most experienced servers, approached with the amuse-bouche, a bite-sized sphere of compressed watermelon topped with fermented black garlic and a microgreen I had sourced from a specialized urban farm. Compliments of the kitchen, she announced, carefully placing one before each diner. Her eyes met mine briefly, a flash of loyalty, before she slipped back into professional mode. Is this all? Heather asked, examining the single bite with blatant disappointment. I'm famished. It's an amuse-bouche, I explained. A palate opener. The meal hasn't actually started yet. I know what an amuse-bouche is, Dara, she snapped, her tone sharp. I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law instead of playing with food. I watched as they each tasted my creation. My mother took the smallest possible bite, ever conscious of calories. My father popped the whole thing in his mouth, barely pausing to taste. Ethan and Allison at least seemed to appreciate it, while Bradley made a show of analyzing the flavors like a wine connoisseur, using terms that made absolutely no culinary sense. Only Heather left hers untouched. I don't do raw garlic, she declared. Though the black garlic was far from raw, it had been fermented for 60 days in a temperature-controlled environment, a delicate process I had perfected after 3 years of experimentation. As our server cleared the plates, I caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes at Heather's untouched creation. In that moment I felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, not for myself, but for my staff who took such immense pride in our work. I had built Maison not just as a restaurant, but as a family of sorts, one bound by shared passion rather than DNA. The evening was just beginning, but already I could feel the old dynamic settling in. I was the outsider, the one who had chosen the wrong path, whose choices constantly needed justification. But unlike the Dara of 5 years ago, I now sat at this table with a powerful secret, one that would soon turn this entire dynamic on its head. So, tell us about the wedding plans, I said, deliberately shifting attention back to Heather as our next course arrived. A delicate composition of heirloom tomatoes, house-made ricotta, and basil oil that had taken me months to perfect. Heather brightened immediately. We've booked St. Thomas Church, of course. Reception at the plaza, 400 guests, though Mother thinks we should cut it to 350. The guest list is getting unwieldy, my mother interjected. The Astor Williams aren't speaking to the Bennetts since that unfortunate yacht incident, so we can't seat them in the same section. I suppressed a smile. The gravity with which they discussed these social calculations never ceased to amaze me. 400 seems excessive, I ventured, taking a bite of the tomato dish. Bradley leaned forward. It's networking, not just celebration. Half those invitations are relationship investments. Precisely, my father agreed. Bradley understands the social capital aspect. A wedding of this caliber opens doors. And what about you, Dara? Heather asked, her tone suddenly sharp. Any prospects on your horizon, or are you still too busy with your cooking? I noticed she had barely touched her food, pushing the heirloom tomatoes around her plate with obvious disinterest. I'm focused on my career right now, I answered simply. Career? Ethan repeated with a small laugh. Is that what we're calling it? My mother jumped in. Dara dear, surely by 29 you're thinking about settling down. There's that lovely son of Margaret Whitley. He's in hospital administration, I believe. Very stable. I'm not looking to be set up, Mother. Well, your options will get more limited with each passing year, she persisted. Especially in your situation. Before I could respond, our server appeared to clear the course. I'd barely registered the taste of my own creation, too tense to properly enjoy it. "Is there a problem with the dish?" Jessica asked Heather, noting her nearly full plate. "Too acidic," Heather replied dismissively. "And the tomatoes could have been riper." I bit my tongue so hard I almost tasted blood. Those tomatoes had been selected at their absolute peak that very morning from a farm upstate that grew specifically for us. "I'm so sorry to hear that," Jessica said with practiced diplomacy. "I'll be sure to inform the kitchen." The next course arrived. Seared scallops with a brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps, a spring special I was particularly proud of. As the plates were set down, I watched my family's reactions. "Now this looks promising," my father declared, cutting into a scallop with his fork. Bradley swirled his wine, a Sancerre I had personally selected to pair with this exact course. "Decent wine list here," he pontificated. "Not exceptional, but passable." Our sommelier Jose, overhearing this as he passed, shot me a quick, knowing glance. I gave him a subtle smile. Jose had been poached from a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris and had turned down offers from establishments around the world just to work with me. "So Dara," Allison began, clearly trying to include me, "Ethan mentioned you're working in food, but you never really specified what exactly you do." Before I could answer, Heather cut in. "She's probably hostessing somewhere, right, Dara? Using that business degree to seat people and hand out menus." "Actually," I started. "No shame in that," my father interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Everyone has to start somewhere. Though, after 5 years, I would have expected some advancement." "I've advanced," I said quietly, my voice a steady thread against their barbs. "Into what?" "Assistant manager at Applebee's." Heather laughed at her own joke, a harsh, grating sound. "Heather," Ethan warned, showing a rare moment of defense for me. "What?" "I'm just being realistic. She chose to abandon her education for this passion project. Actions have consequences." I took a slow sip of wine, allowing the familiar notes to center me. "And how is law treating you, Heather?" "Still at Henderson and Block." Her expression tightened, just barely. "I'm between positions at the moment, actually, taking time to plan the wedding." "She was working too many hours," Bradley interjected, smoothly taking over the narrative. I told her, "My wife doesn't need to kill herself at some firm. Once we're married, she can do charity work like my mother." I noticed a flash of resentment, a flicker of frustration, in Heather's eyes before she smoothed her expression back to placid agreement. The next course arrived, a pasta dish featuring hand-rolled tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and mint, one of our signature dishes that had been featured in Food and Wine. "The portion size here is ridiculous," my mother commented, looking at the artfully plated pasta with disdain. "All this expense for 3 bites. It's about quality over quantity, Mother," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "The tasting menu is designed to take you through multiple flavors and textures. In my day, restaurants gave you a proper meal for your money," my father grumbled. "This cuisine nonsense is just a way to charge more for less food." I watched as Bradley cut into his pasta rather than twirling it, brutally breaking the delicate strands I had rolled by hand that very morning. "So, how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary?" Heather asked bluntly, her eyes piercing mine. "This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city." I felt all eyes turn to me, the interrogation escalating. "I manage my finances carefully," I replied, my jaw tight. "Oh please," Heather scoffed. "A dinner here costs more than you probably make in a day. Who are you dating? Is he paying for this?" "I'm not dating anyone," I said evenly, meeting her stare. "Then how can you possibly afford this place?" she pressed, relentless. "Are you in debt? Maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances?" "Heather," Ethan warned again, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "No, I want to know," she insisted. We all rearranged our schedules for this dinner that she suggested at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Either she's being financially irresponsible or she's not being honest about her situation. The main course arrived, A perfectly cooked duck breast with cherry gastrique and farro. Chef Miranda, who ran the kitchen when I wasn't on the line, had executed it flawlessly. "This duck is undercooked," Bradley announced after one bite. I looked at his plate. The duck was a perfect medium rare, exactly as it should be. "It's meant to be served that way," I explained, trying to maintain my calm. "Medium rare is the optimal temperature for duck breast. I prefer my meat well done," he declared, motioning for a server. When Jessica approached, he spoke without looking at her. "This is raw. Take it back and cook it properly." I saw the flash of annoyance in Jessica's eyes, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Of course, sir, my apologies." As she took his plate, I caught her eye and gave a slight, imperceptible nod. She would know to have the kitchen prepare a new breast, rather than ruining the existing one by overcooking it. "Really, Dara?" my mother said once Jessica had gone, her voice laced with disapproval. "You still haven't answered Heather's question. How are you affording this dinner?" The tension at the table was palpable now, thick and suffocating. I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had during countless family dinners growing up, the sense of being cornered, judged, and found wanting before I'd even had a chance to speak. But I wasn't that same insecure young woman anymore. I had built something I was profoundly proud of, something that was entirely mine. For a fleeting moment, I considered revealing everything right then, watching their expressions change as they realized whose restaurant they were sitting in, whose food they had been critiquing so carelessly. Before I could decide, Bradley's overcooked duck returned, now lacking all the tenderness and complexity it had originally possessed. "Much better," he declared after one bite, though I could see from across the table that it was now dry and tough. My father signaled for the wine list again. "Let's order another bottle, something more impressive this time." As Jose approached with a leather-bound list, my father made a show of examining it, finally pointing to one of our most expensive options, a Bordeaux priced at over $800. "This one should be adequate," he declared. I knew that bottle intimately. I had selected it during a trip to France last year, meeting with the vintner personally. It was spectacular, but completely wrong for the current course and the ones to follow. "May I suggest something that might pair better with the remaining dishes?" I ventured. My father waved me off. "I think I know my wines, Dara." Jose caught my eye, silently asking for direction. I gave him a small nod. Let my father have his way. This wasn't the hill to die on. As the evening progressed through the final savory course and into dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart that was one of my personal favorites, the jabs continued. Every dish met with some form of criticism. Every attempt I made to contribute to the conversation was somehow twisted into further evidence of my supposed failure. By the time coffee was served, I felt emotionally drained, utterly exhausted. The double burden of enduring my family's condescension while watching them thoughtlessly critique my life's work was becoming unbearable. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The check. Marcus approached with a black leather folder containing the bill, placing it discreetly in the center of the table. My father reached for it immediately, a reflex of patriarchal duty, but Bradley intercepted. "Please, Richard, allow me," he said, with the practiced smoothness of someone who has turned even generosity into a power move. "Consider it my treat to celebrate the occasion." My father made the expected token protest before acquiescing. I watched as Bradley opened the folder, his confident smile slowly shifting to a barely concealed shock as he registered the total. "Is there a problem?" my father asked, noticing the change. No, Bradley recovered quickly, though his voice was a bit strained, just confirming the calculation. I knew exactly what he was looking at. A dinner for 7 with premium wine pairings, special off-menu requests, and that $800 Bordeaux would run well over $3,000. Not outrageous for a restaurant of Maison's caliber, but certainly a statement. He reached for his wallet, extracting a black credit card with deliberate slowness, making sure everyone noticed the exclusive tier. Heather, perhaps sensing his discomfort, chose that precise moment to circle back to her earlier interrogation. "So, Dara," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you never did tell us how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant dinner. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself financially on our account." All eyes turned to me again. I could feel the familiar dynamic asserting itself. Heather, the successful one. Me, the struggling disappointment. "I can cover my portion," I said simply, my voice tight. "Can you though?" she pressed, leaning forward, her eyes narrowed. "Because we all know what food service pays. Can you even afford this place?" The table fell silent. The question hung in the air, so deliberately insulting that even my parents looked uncomfortable. "Heather," my mother murmured, "perhaps this isn't—" "No, I want to know," Heather insisted, eyes locked on mine. "We've spent the entire evening pretending that everything's fine. That Dara's choice to throw away her education hasn't left her struggling. I think we deserve some honesty." I felt a hot flush rising from my chest to my face. 5 years of distance, of building my own life and success, and nothing had changed. I was still the family disappointment, still being asked to justify my existence. Bradley, perhaps sensing an opportunity to reassert control after the check shock, joined in. "If you need help with your portion, just say so. No shame in that." "I don't need help," I said, my voice tight, a steel edge beneath the calm. "Then how exactly are you paying for this?" Heather demanded. "Because a meal here costs more than you probably make in a week." I opened my mouth to respond, to finally reveal everything, when Bradley suddenly frowned at the bill again. "Wait, there's a mistake here," he announced. "They've only charged us for the wines, not the food." He signaled sharply for Marcus. "Excuse me, there's an error on our check." Marcus approached our table with perfect timing, as though he'd been waiting for this exact moment. In reality, he probably had been. My staff knew me well enough to be watching this drama unfold from the periphery. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. "Yes, you've only charged us for the beverages, not the meal," Bradley said, pointing at the bill. His voice tinged with irritation. Marcus looked at the check, then at me. His expression subtly questioning. In that moment I made my decision. The charade had gone on long enough. I gave Marcus a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "There's no error, sir," Marcus said smoothly, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "The dinner portion has been taken care of." "By whom?" my father asked, frowning, utterly confused. Marcus turned to me, his professional demeanor giving way to a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome back, Miss Dara. Your usual table is ready for your meeting with the investors. Would you like me to handle the situation?" The silence that fell over the table was absolute, thick enough to cut with a knife. Pairs of eyes turned to me in various stages of confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Yes, please close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab. The rest is on the house, as usual." "Very good, Miss Dara," he replied, taking the folder from Bradley's now slack grip. "Chef Miranda mentioned she'd like your opinion on the new spring menu items when you have a moment." "I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting," I assured him. As Marcus departed, I finally looked directly at my family. Their expressions ranged from utter confusion to shock, to the slow, painful dawning of understanding. What is happening?" My mother finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper. I took a deep, fortifying breath. The moment I had both dreaded and secretly anticipated for 5 years had arrived. "Welcome to Maison," I said simply, my gaze sweeping over each of them. "My restaurant." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. My father was the first to recover, his expression shifting from confusion to a rapid, calculating assessment. "Your restaurant," he repeated carefully. "You work here." "No, father," I clarified, feeling a strange, profound calm settle over me. "I own Maison. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." "That's impossible." Heather blurted, her voice tight with disbelief. This is one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It's been featured in major magazines. Yes, I agreed, a small triumphant smile touching my lips. Food and wine last month. Bon appetit before that. The New York Times gave us 4 stars in their review last year. Bradley was staring at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. But you said you worked in food. I was vague about everything, I explained, meeting their stunned gazes, because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was struggling. And you've all made that abundantly clear tonight. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls, her go-to gesture when socially destabilized. Darling, why wouldn't you tell us about this achievement? The way she emphasized achievement spoke volumes. Success, it seemed, made my choices retroactively acceptable in a way passion alone never could. Would you like the full story? I asked, looking around the table, seeing their faces, truly seeing them for the first time in years. Without waiting for an answer, I continued. After I left 5 years ago, I moved to the city with what little savings I had. I rented a tiny room in an apartment with 3 roommates in Queens. For the first year I worked 3 jobs. Prep cook at a bistro from 5 a.m. to noon, line cook at a midtown restaurant from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., and weekend shifts at a bakery. I took a sip of water, noting their uncomfortable, shifting expressions. I slept 4 hours a night. I had blisters and burns up and down my arms. I studied technique obsessively in my rare free moments. Chef Lauren, who had initially encouraged me to pursue culinary arts, took me under his wing. I became his sous chef within 18 months. Ethan was watching me with what appeared to be genuine interest, a flicker of something close to admiration in his eyes. Allison looked genuinely impressed. My parents seemed frozen in a state of frantic reassessment. 2.5 years ago, I was working a private event at Lauren's restaurant. A guest, James Warren of Warren Capital, tried my special course and asked to meet the chef. He was surprised to find someone so young had created what he called the most innovative dish he'd tasted in years. I gestured around us, taking in the beautiful space. James became my investor. We found this space, which was a failed nightclub at the time. I developed the concept, designed the menu, hired the staff, oversaw every single detail, from the lighting fixtures to the custom plates. But the cost, my father said. His mind still seemingly stuck on the finances. A restaurant of this caliber in this location, it must have required millions. $3.4 million for the initial investment, I confirmed, watching his eyes widen. James brought in 2 other investors. We opened to immediate acclaim, partly due to Lauren's endorsement and industry connections. 6 months in, we were profitable. 3 months after that, I used the restaurant's success to secure a loan and buy out my investors. I've been sole owner for over a year now. That's why you suggested we meet here, Heather realized, her voice small, tinged with a new, unwelcome humility. You knew all along. Actually no, I corrected her gently. Allison chose this restaurant. Isn't that right, Allison? All eyes turned to Ethan's wife, who blushed deeply. I had no idea, Dara, she stammered. The concierge at Ethan's firm recommended it as the most impressive new restaurant in the city. I swear I didn't know it was yours. Of course you didn't, I assured her, a genuine smile for her. No one in the family knew. That was deliberate on my part. But why keep it secret? My mother pressed, bewildered. We're your family. We would have been proud. I couldn't help the sharp, almost bitter laugh that escaped me. Would you? The same family who called cooking servants' work, who cut me off completely when I chose culinary school, who just minutes ago were making snide comments about my life choices, about my ability to afford this meal. My father cleared his throat, a defensive gesture. Now, Dara, that's unfair. We were concerned about your stability, your future. If we'd known you had this kind of business acumen. That's exactly my point, I interrupted, cutting him off firmly. You couldn't respect my passion alone. It only has value to you now that it comes with success and status. At that precise moment, Chef Miranda approached our table. In her crisp whites, Miranda Torres, chef de cuisine embroidered on the breast, she made an impressive figure. "Sorry to interrupt, Dara," she said, her voice professional but warm, "but the Matsuhisa party has arrived for their tasting, and Savoir wants to confirm your interview for next week's feature. Also, your publisher called about the cookbook cover design." He nodded. "Thank you, Miranda. Please tell them I'll be there shortly." As Miranda departed, I registered the growing amazement and frankly bewilderment on my family's faces. "Cookbook?" Heather echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "Coming out this fall with Knopf," I confirmed. 120 recipes with personal stories. "Dara," my mother began, her voice taking on the coaxing, managing tone she used when trying to salvage a social situation. "This is all so impressive. Why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have helped, supported you. The way you supported me when I needed it most." I asked quietly, my voice laced with the old hurt. "By cutting me off completely. We thought it was a phase," my father protested, sounding genuinely perplexed. "How were we to know you had this level of entrepreneurial spirit? You've clearly inherited my business sense." I felt a flash of sharp anger at his blatant attempt to claim credit for my success. "I built this myself," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Without your connections, your money, or your support." Bradley, who had been suspiciously quiet, suddenly perked up. "A cookbook deal, that must come with a substantial advance. And this place," he gestured around appreciatively, his earlier criticisms completely forgotten, "it must generate significant revenue." "Ooh. You have plans for expansion? Perhaps a restaurant group?" "I have some contacts in hospitality investment who might be interested." I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer transparency of his pivot from condescension to networking opportunity. "I'm doing quite well with my current advisors, but thank you," I said, a dry edge to my tone. Heather shot him a look of pure irritation before turning back to me. "So, all this time while I thought you were struggling, you were actually succeeding, building all this?" "Yes," I said simply. "And tonight," she continued, her voice hardening, laced with embarrassment, "you let us sit here criticizing your food, your wine list, your portion sizes, all while knowing it was yours. I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was still the family failure," I explained, holding her gaze. "And now I know." "That seems manipulative," she snapped, but I could see the profound embarrassment behind her anger. "More manipulative than asking how I could afford to eat here, then suggesting I must be in debt or dating someone wealthy just to afford a meal at this table." I countered, my voice rising slightly. "You weren't concerned about me, Heather. You were enjoying what you thought was your superiority." The restaurant had gradually emptied as we talked, the evening service winding down. Jose approached with a bottle. "Your special reserve cognac, Miss Dara," he said, "for your investors' meeting. And Chef Miranda says the kitchen is ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Jose," I replied. "Please let Miranda know I'll be there in 10 minutes. As he left, I turned back to my stunned family. "I have a business to run," I said, rising from my seat. "Thank you for coming this evening." "Dara, wait," my mother said quickly, pushing herself up from the table. "Don't leave like this. We should celebrate your success. Perhaps we could all have brunch this weekend. Catch up properly." I looked at her, seeing for the first time not the intimidating figure of my childhood, but simply a woman trying desperately to salvage her pride and position. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice softer now. "But right now, I have investors waiting and a kitchen to oversee." As I turned to leave, Ethan stood up. "Dara," he said, his voice quieter, more genuine than the others. "For what it's worth, this is incredible. What you've built here, it's remarkable. I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner." Of all the reactions, his felt the most honest, the most heartfelt. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, a silent thanks, before walking away from the table where I had just changed the dynamics of my family forever. I had barely made it 10 steps when I heard the quick click of heels behind me. Turning, I found my mother hurrying to catch up, her perfectly composed facade finally beginning to crack. "Dara, please," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You can't just drop this revelation and walk away. We need to talk about this." I glanced toward the private dining room where my actual investors, a group discussing funding for my next restaurant concept, were waiting. "I have a meeting, Mother." "Postpone it," she insisted, her voice tight with urgency. "This is family." "Family hasn't been a priority for you in 5 years," I replied, keeping my voice steady and firm. "My business commitments don't suddenly become optional because you finally decided my career is worthy of your attention." The rest of the family had followed her, creating an awkward, uncomfortable cluster near the bar area. My father looked distinctly uncomfortable, clearly unaccustomed to not being in control of a situation. Heather's expression wavered between resentment and something that might have been dawning respect. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow," my father suggested in his usual problem-solving business tone. "Dinner at our place. We have much to discuss, including how we might help you expand," Bradley added eagerly, stepping forward. "My firm specializes in—" "I don't need your help," I interrupted firmly, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I didn't build this place to finally win your approval. I built it because this is what I love, what I'm good at. The fact that it's successful doesn't suddenly make my passion more valid than it was 5 years ago." "No one is saying that, darling," my mother backpedaled, her voice suddenly placating. "We're simply proud of what you've accomplished." "Are you proud, Mother?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. "Or are you just relieved that my choices no longer embarrass you socially?" Her flinch told me I'd hit close to home. "That's unfair," my father interjected. "We've always wanted what's best for you." "No," I corrected him, shaking my head. "You wanted what aligned with your vision for me. There's a difference." Miranda appeared at my side, her presence a welcome, grounding support. "The Haverford group is asking if you'll be joining them soon," she said quietly. 5 minutes, I promised her. As Miranda nodded and stepped away, I turned back to my family. "I need to go." "Dara." Heather stepped forward, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, a hint of something fragile in its place. "I owe you an apology. The things I said tonight, they were unkind." "They were honest," I replied, a wry smile touching my lips. "And that's the silver lining of this evening. I got to see exactly how you all view me when you think I'm struggling." "That's not fair," Ethan said, joining the conversation, looking genuinely distressed. "People make judgments based on the information they have. We didn't know." "You didn't know I was successful," I clarified, my voice steady. "But you also didn't know I was pursuing something I loved. That should have been enough for my family to show basic respect." A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "You're right," my father finally said, surprising me. His voice was low, laced with a rare vulnerability. "We should have supported your passion, regardless of its outcome." Coming from him, this admission was profoundly significant. Richard Mitchell didn't acknowledge mistakes easily. "Where do we go from here?" my mother asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice, another rarity. I took a deep breath, considering the question. Despite everything, these people were my family. The hurt they caused was real, palpable, but so was our shared history. Complete estrangement had never been my ultimate goal. Just enough distance to build my own life without their judgment constantly clouding my decisions. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But tonight has made one thing clear. If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be on different terms. I'm not the family failure seeking redemption. I'm a successful chef and business owner who deserves the same respect you'd give any other professional." "Of course," my father agreed quickly, almost too quickly. "And that means no more comments about my life choices, no more unsolicited career advice, and absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant," I added with a pointed look at Bradley, who had the grace to look genuinely embarrassed. "What about Heather's wedding?" my mother began tentatively. "What about it?" I asked. "We'd still like you to be there," Heather said, her voice softening, losing its defensive edge. As my sister, not as whatever we thought you were before tonight. I looked at her, trying to see past the years of competition and judgment. Despite everything, there had been good times too. Secrets shared as children, supporting each other through our heartbreaks. Inside jokes no one else understood. I'll be there, I promised. Then, after a moment's consideration, I added, and if you'd like, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Maison as my gift. Heather's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise and gratitude there. You would do that? After how we've treated you? You're still my sister, I said simply. But to be clear, this isn't me seeking your approval. It's me offering something I'm proud of on my own terms. I understand, she said quietly. And I would be honored. A genuine, unguarded smile, the first of the evening, passed between us. Now I really do need to go, I said, gesturing toward the private dining room. Of course, my father nodded, suddenly understanding. Your business comes first. Not always, I corrected him. But tonight. Yes. As they gathered their things to leave, I added, I'm free for brunch on Sunday. My mother's face instantly brightened. Not at your club, though. There's a small place in the East Village I think you should experience. We'll be there, my mother promised, looking visibly relieved at this small opening, this fragile thread of connection. I watched them file out of the restaurant, their perspectives irrevocably changed, their world perhaps just a little bit wider. As the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath, feeling oddly lighter, like a heavy weight had finally been lifted. Miranda approached again. Everything okay? Getting there, I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. Family is complicated. Tell me about it, she laughed. My mother still introduces me as her daughter who works at a restaurant, like I'm a teenage waitress at Denny's. I chuckled, grateful for her understanding. Let's go talk spring menu. I have some new ideas I'm excited about. As we walked toward the kitchen, my sanctuary, my achievement, my true home, I realized that the most important revelation of the evening wasn't showing my family what I'd built. It was fully, truly recognizing it myself. I had created this success entirely on my own terms, regardless of their approval, and that knowledge was worth more than any validation they could ever offer. 2 weeks later, life was a whirlwind. Spring menu planning, intense meetings with my publisher about the cookbook layout, and preliminary discussions about a potential second restaurant location kept me gratefully busy. But thoughts of that family dinner remained, surfacing in quiet moments, demanding reflection. Sunday brunch at Alma's, a hole-in-the-wall gem run by a former colleague from my early days on the line, had gone surprisingly well. My parents had been visibly uncomfortable at first with the mismatched chairs and graffiti-decorated walls, but the food, unpretentious, yet masterfully executed, had slowly won them over. I never knew simple eggs could taste like this, my father had admitted, mopping up the last of his shakshuka with homemade sourdough. Small steps. Not a complete, dramatic transformation, but an opening. Now, sitting at my usual table after closing time, I watched the staff complete their final duties. Jessica was counting the register, humming softly. Marcus and Jose were deep in discussion about wine pairings for tomorrow's private event. Miranda had left an hour ago after we'd finalized the spring menu revisions. My phone buzzed with a text from Heather. Wedding planning nightmare. Florists just doubled their quote. Any chance you're free for coffee tomorrow? Could use some straight talk from someone who won't just tell me what I want to hear. I smiled slightly at this unexpected request for my opinion. Another small step. I texted back, confirming a time and place. The relationship with my family was slowly, tentatively evolving into something I couldn't have predicted. Not the unconditional embrace I might have once craved, but something potentially more valuable. A measured respect between adults with different values and paths. My mother had called 3 times in the past 2 weeks, her usual formality softening into genuine questions about my work. My father had sent an article about female chefs breaking barriers in the industry, a silent acknowledgement that he was trying, finally, to understand my world. Even Ethan had reached out, asking if he could bring his children to see the kitchen sometime. "I want them to know they have options," he'd said. "That success doesn't have to look the same for everyone." These were fragile beginnings, not the dramatic, Hollywood reconciliation. Real healing, I was learning, happens in quiet moments and small gestures, in the gradual painstaking rewriting of old patterns. The most significant change, though, wasn't in my family's perception of me, but in how I had finally stopped measuring my worth through their eyes. The validation I had once desperately sought from them now felt strangely, beautifully unnecessary. I had proven myself not to them, but to myself. This profound realization had rippled through other areas of my life as well. I'd launched a mentorship program for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering them the guidance and opportunity I'd fought so hard to find alone. Every Saturday morning, the Maison kitchen transformed into a vibrant classroom for 8 aspiring culinary artists who reminded me so much of my younger self. Passionate, determined, in need only of someone who believed in their potential. One of them, a brilliant young woman named Zoe, had shown such incredible promise that I'd offered her an apprenticeship. Watching her confidence grow with each new skill mastered brought a satisfaction different from any professional accolade I'd received. "Chef," Jessica's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "We're all set for closing. Anything else you need before we head out?" "No, thank you," I smiled. "You all did amazing work tonight." As the staff filed out, calling their goodnights, I remained at my table, notebook open to a blank page. I'd been trying to articulate the introduction to my cookbook, struggling to find words that truly captured my journey. In the quiet of the empty restaurant, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I finally began to write. Food has always been my truest language. When words failed, I spoke through flavors. When paths seemed unclear, I followed my palate. The dishes in this book are more than recipes. They're chapters of a life lived in pursuit of authenticity rather than approval. 5 years ago, I stood at a crossroads between expectation and passion. Choosing the latter cost me dearly, but ultimately led to the richest feast I could have imagined. Not merely in professional success, but in the discovery that true wealth isn't measured by external validation or material achievement, but by the courage to honor your own voice, even when it speaks in whispers against the shouts of doubt. I set down my pen, the words finally flowing freely, truthfully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A difficult vendor negotiation, Heather's wedding planning drama, finalizing the cookbook introduction. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of exhaustion so complete I'd fallen asleep in kitchen corners during rare breaks. Burns and cuts that left scars still visible on my hands. Moments of doubt so intense I'd questioned everything, felt utterly alone. But I had persevered. Not because I needed to prove my worth to others, but because I couldn't imagine living any other way. In choosing authenticity over approval, I'd found something more valuable than either success or family validation. I'd found myself. Have you ever had to choose between meeting others' expectations and following your own heart? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more true stories of resilience and triumph, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that the most important approval comes from within. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, the most meaningful success is measured not by others' standards, but by the joy and purpose you find along your own path.